I want to begin today by turning to 2 Timothy 3 in verse 12. We have this letter of encouragement that Paul has given to Timothy. Of course, we realize 2 Timothy was the last epistle that Paul would ever write, and so certainly the words we read here are very special and important, and certainly are very meaningful, because these really were his final marching encouragements to Timothy. But he encourages him in verse 12, 2 Timothy 3 and verse 12, yes, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. But evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. Of course, that only goes to understand that if a person is deceived, it's easy for them to deceive others, sometimes not even knowing it. But continue you in the things which you have learned and has been assured of, knowing them of whom you have learned them, and that from a child you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise in salvation through faith, which is in Christ Jesus. All Scripture, as from beginning to end, all the way from Genesis to Revelation. Of course, at this time, we have to understand that essentially the New Testament canon had not been written, and essentially what he's referring to is the Old Testament at this time. But all Scripture is given by inspiration of God, or actually the word there actually means, word inspire actually comes from a Greek word which means to breathe into. And it tells us here that one translation reads that all Scripture is God-breathed and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect or mature, or actually are fully equipped. NIV has equipped for every good work, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. When I first came into the knowledge of the truth as a young child, as a young teenager, I was about 13 years of age, and I can still remember back listening to the World Tomorrow broadcast and hearing Herbert Armstrong or Gardner Ted coming on the air with their thundering voices, powerful voices, preaching the truth. But it's amazing to me that God's truth, the message I hear, are just as exciting as they have always been. And certainly, I think that's the way it should be for all of us. Hopefully none of us, certainly when we first came into God's church, there was a very special first love, but hopefully we never entirely lose that. But I remember when I first began visiting Sabbath services, and of course, when you first come into God's church, I mean, you're hungry. I mean, it's all, you're learning. There's so much you have to learn. I remember the first time I asked E.C. Davis, who was a deacon at that time, I said, now what is the second tithe? Is it 10% of your first? And then he said, it was kind of a pregnant pause, and he said, well, no, it's an additional 10%. And I kind of got a lump in my throat. But I understand, I've come to see that it is doable, and God does bless you. But all those lessons we had to learn and understand. But I remember hearing some of the same messages essentially year after year. When it came Christmas time, I'd hear a Christmas sermon. Came Easter time, I'd hear an Easter sermon. When it was around Passover, I would hear a Passover sermon. And came Halloween, season of Halloween, I would hear a Halloween sermon. And I wondered, some of this became repetitive, and I wondered, was it really necessary for us to hear some of the same messages in topic every year about the same time? But I realized, though, that the wisdom of God's admonishment that we were and are to speak in season, to be instant in season. I've seen the reality of it is in the last 30, 40 years about how easy it is for God's people to be led away by fables and the pulls of this world. What a shock it was to me to get a Christmas tree. I'm not a Christmas tree. Thankfully, I didn't get a Christmas tree. That would have been quite a package, wouldn't it? But a Christmas card from a man I had went to church with decades ago. I've heard stories of parents, unbelievably, sending their children out on Halloween, and even in this society with the dangers of that, that was hard to believe. I remember a lady's former minister's wife that can now sit in the pews of a Protestant church and accept some of the pagan doctrines that at one time we come to understand that we cannot correct. And so I realize certainly the wisdom that God had, He knows that we need to be continually reminded of His truth. And certainly the words of Paul to the Galatians certainly resonate with that, when the Galatians were falling away from the truth. And Paul made this statement in Galatians 1 and verse 6, I marvel that you are so soon removed from Him that called you unto the grace of Christ, unto another gospel, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. And so certainly that does happen, and certainly it is the work of the adversary. We know it speaks in Revelation 12 and verse 9, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. We read over in 2 Thessalonians 2, 2 Thessalonians 2. This statement here that Paul makes, same warning that we have for us today as the end draws near. And he encourages us here, as he did the people at that time, now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto Him, that you be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled neither by spirit, and obviously there certainly could have been false prophecies that were circulating through unclean spirits, nor by word, nor by letter from us, as the day of Christ is at hand. Obviously there was some preaching that Christ's coming was just almost right there. Some had even been preaching the resurrection was already past. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there be a falling away first, and the word there is apostasia, and apostasy, and as we've talked about so many times, you can't apostatize from something that you haven't been a part of. And these were individuals who had the truth. This was an apostasy. Have we seen that in the church? It certainly would seem that we have. We talk about, I remember Walter Martin that had his broadcast Kingdom of Occults. Maybe it wasn't Walter Martin. I think it was Frank Hanegraaff, his successor, that made the comment that never in history had he ever seen a church dismantle his whole doctrinal system like the Worldwide Church of God did. It was unheard of. And certainly you have to realize how powerful the adversary's hands are. And I listened to some of the men who were responsible for that saying, well, they had been influenced by some of the theological seminaries and schools they had been to, and they came to the conclusion that we did not understand the truth, and therefore the entire system had to be dismantled. And that work began, and we saw it happen back in the 90s. But Paul is saying this is not going to happen unless apostasy, there'll be an apostasy, and that Son of Man be revealed, the son of perdition, or actually the son of destruction, or devoted to destruction. We know he is prophesied that he will be destroyed, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God and that is worshipped, so that he as God, since in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And we're yet to see this leader that will come on the scene, these great miracles. They will be sitting in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. He says, remember you not that when I was with you, I told you these things? And now you know what withholdeth or withstraineth, this New American Standard, translate. So obviously, Paul is talking about that God has been able to restrain this system until the end time. It's been at work ever since the time of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. That he might be revealed, and now we know what restraineth, that he might be revealed in his time. In other words, God is waiting for the right time for this individual to come on the scene when God's entire plan has been fulfilled. For the mystery of iniquity, this word is paramount. I don't think we understand how important it is to understand this word iniquity. No law, anomos, without law. That's been in existence since the beginning of time. Does it already work? This mystery of lawlessness, what is that? It is camouflaged lawlessness. It's lawlessness and breaking of God's law that is camouflaged within the religious systems of this world. And we see it all over. We'll be talking about as we go on today. But it says, only he who now lets or allows will let until he be he, speaking of this false Christ, this false God, this false religious leader, Antichrist, be taken out of the way. Whom then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and destroy with the brightness of his coming. So, we live in a world that the adversary is very much alive. He's working day and night to install and instill that lawlessness within this entire world, especially within God's church and his people. And I see it all the time. I struggle with it all the time on some of our Facebook sites, individuals that try to pervert the truth. And it's never going to end. I've had to deal with it in the church. But certainly, we understand that we enter this season now that certainly indicates that the majority of mainstream Christianity, what actually is pseudo-Christianity, is doing this very thing. Let's turn to Deuteronomy 12 and verse 30. Some of what we'll be going through I know is going to be reviewed, but I think it's important that we do that. I'm going to be doing quite a bit of reading today. I don't expect you to be able to remember everything we talk about, but certainly if you can remember the overarching view of what we'll be talking about. Deuteronomy 12 and verse 30. God says here, when the Lord your God shall cut off the nations from before you, where you go to possess them, and you succeed, or you follow them and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself that you be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before you, and that you inquire not after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. And that's something, isn't that something that after they had been destroyed, they're going back and they're saying, well, how do they serve their gods? So we have people that, after they come to the truth, want to go right back to following the false ideas of the false religion they've come out of, the false practices they've come out of. How do these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. And you shall not do so unto the Lord your God. For every abomination to the Lord which he hates have they done unto their gods. For even their sons and their daughters have they burned into the fire unto their gods. We know Molech was a god that was worshipped by the Ammonites. We know that we talked about how that King Hezekiah's father Ahaz had some of his own brothers sacrificed to Molech. And God said he hates that. But whatsoever I command you, observe to do it. You shall not add thereto. We know the Pharisees added to God's instructions, all the laws that man's laws that they came up with, the traditions of men, nor diminish from it, liberalism. But we're just to be balanced, just to walk and to do what God, exactly what God has commanded us to do. Yet the majority of Christianity have three main components, really, of false religion. And you'll find this repeatedly true. They have a certain amount of the truth. They have false teaching. And then they also have pagan customs and practices that have been homogenized, amalgamated, incorporated within Christianity. And we're in the midst of a season now when the majority of our society, including professing Christians, it's quite amazing that many churches observe the practice. Oftentimes they'll make compromises and they'll have a little Halloween party right there at their church. I'm just kind of amazed. You know, you walk in one of the thrift stores we like to buy things from. You go in there this time of year, you find these aisles just filled with all these accoutrements of Halloween, all these masks and all the other things we see. You drive down here by the University of New Mexico this time of year, you'll see people walking around in Halloween garb. One time we went into a bank and here was a lady with supposedly blood dripping down her face in a bank, of all places. It's kind of amazing. And you wonder why. Why in the 21st century are we still influenced by these pagan ideas and practices long ago of antiquity? Why the attraction? Certainly we realize Satan and the devil being the God of this world, we understand that why. Now, instead of giving you a lot of distorted facts and trivia about Halloween, I hopefully you'll be able to get a good recording of this, because I would like to send it out on our tape outreach program up on our website. Let's see if we can get a basic understanding of where these observances of Halloween come from, to understand its basic components, its roots. You know, it tells us in 1 Corinthians 14:33 that God is not the author of confusion. And we look at these practices, and oftentimes it just seems so confusing. Well, where do they all come from, and how does this relate to that? And it gets. But if we understand the basic components of Halloween, I think it will help us to come to a more good understanding. And we're going to see that Halloween basically has three major components we will be talking about today. First of all, Halloween, the ancient Romans had a harvest festival in honor of a goddess by the name of Pomona. Pomona. Pomona, we know, was the goddess of fruit and trees and harvest in Roman mythology. Actually, gardens and orchards were devoted to her. And of course, most of what hinges as to why these people honor these gods is because they were looking for blessings. They thought, well, if they honor these gods in a certain way, they would be blessed. It would be propitious. If, back in Old Testament Israel, we know Balaam was a great system of worship. And not only did they have the major god Baal, but every little town and village had their little, what you might call little Baals. It's kind of like Santa Claus and his many helpers we see today, And there would even be bales of fields. And, one of the situations that came about with the Israelites when they came into Canaan, and oftentimes, they weren't familiar with, they come out of Egypt, they weren't familiar with the farming practices there in Canaan. And certainly the thought would be, well, how can I have a good crop? Well, the Canaanites were into Baal worship. And they certainly would have been more than willing to explain to you how that you needed to sacrifice to a certain Baal, local Baal, there where you would be farming or harvesting your crops. It really was quite a system of worship, but that's the basic idea behind this false worship. They were looking for the blessings of these false gods and goddesses. And all types of fruits that were grown during the summer, that started for the winter, nuts and fruits and all of that, grains, were devoted and were given to this goddess Pomona. I want to read to you. Let me do a lot of reading today. I'm going to take my reading glasses out. And I hope this doesn't bore you, but I think some of these, don't expect you to be able to retain all these facts, but certainly it'll give you an overview where you realize not just me saying this. This comes out of credible sources that will show and demonstrate what I'm saying. So I want to read to you here, so I can find the right section I want to read. Definitely need my reading glasses. I can see that right now. This comes from the handbook of Christian customs by Weiser. In those countries that belong to the Roman Empire, there is the custom of eating or giving away fruit, especially on Halloween. It spread to neighboring countries, to Ireland and Scotland, to Britain, to Slavic countries such as Austria. It is probably based on the celebration of the Roman goddess Pomona, to whom orchards and gardens were dedicated. Since the annual festival of Pomona was held on November 1st, so we see that Halloween observed on October 30th, comes on the eve of this day. Of course, we know that days correctly begin at sundown, sunset. But since the annual festival of Pomona was held on November 1st, the relics of that observance became part of our Halloween celebration. For instance, the familiar practice of dunking for apples. Now, most all of us who came out of a mainstream church certainly had that custom. I came out of the Baptist church, so certainly that we were all very familiar with that. The thought that we wouldn't do those things, the fact they were pagan, we never gave it much thought. In some ways, the Roman harvest festival seems like a counterfeit Feast of Tabernacles, which was actually based around the fall harvest, called the Feast of Ingathering. Of course, we know that the Feast of Tabernacles was built around the harvest seasons of Israel, and we know that God's plan, God's way, is revelatory. It shows us we have a tremendous system of holy days that open up the plan of God. And on the other hand, we have these pagan holidays that just totally obscure the understanding that God would have us to have. We notice 1 Kings 12. Some say this was the first Halloween. I'm not so sure I could go that far, but certainly in principle and what happened certainly is very similar. And notice here, 1 Kings 12. We know, of course, 1 Kings 12, it talks about how that Israel was divided because of their rebellion, that Rehoboam, that was Solomon's successor, very unwisely put even more burdens upon Israel. And northern Israel, essentially northern Israel, although Simeon lived south of Judah, but we know that the 10 tribes separated from Benjamin and Judah and in history. But Jeroboam, of course, was their leader. 1 Kings 12 and verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem and Mount Ephraim and dwelt there, and went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said, 1 Kings 12 verse 26, now shall the kingdom return unto the house of David. He realized, he was looking, he thought, well, if these people go back and they worship down there, we're going to lose them. I think I can see some of that thought as some of the churches that kind of have strong, high walls, some of the organizations around them now. They really discourage you going to another organizational site because they're afraid they might lose you. And Jeroboam thought, well, you know, if they go down and if they keep the feast in Jerusalem, then I'm going to lose them. They're going to return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, then shall the heart of the people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they shall kill me and go again to Rehoboam, king of Judah. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves. We know that there's a great deal of history with the calf worship. We know that the Egyptian idols of Apis and Menes were winged bulls. Probably had a slight resemblance to the cherubim. But certainly, he took 2 calves of gold. He knew that they would be susceptible to worshiping calves and bulls. And said to them, "It's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem." Convenience Christianity. I had a lady the other day that's another Sabbath keeping organization, and she made the remark, "Well, why should I keep festivals where I have to give arm and a leg to attend?" That's what she said. And I made the remark, "Well, God has always required sacrifice." And I mentioned there on Facebook, I said, "Well, I remember the first Feast of Tabernacles I ever kept, I was making I guess it was the second one I kept. I was making $35 a week. It was still doable. My second time was still sufficient, and God always provides." But it was convenience Christianity. "It's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold, your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And he set the one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan, on the northernmost part, southernmost part of Israel. And this thing became a sin. Isn't that something? For the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan, and he made a house of high places and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi. And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month. Now, isn't that, and that's same season of the year when Halloween will later be observed. Now, I think in 2016, I believe that the Feast of Tabernacles will begin, I believe, around the 18th. Excuse me. Let me back up a little bit. This would have been this year, the 15th day of the 8th month in 2016 would be around November the 18th. So I'm just giving you that as a date. I'm not talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. I'm talking about a month later, the 8th month. We know the feast is kept during the 7th month. So a month, in the year 2016, you go to the 8th month, a month past when the Feast of Tabernacles is kept in the 15th day of the 7th month, a month past, and the 8th month is going to be around if you look on your calendar, be around the 18th of November. So this was essentially a November celebration, same time, of course, the same time of the year that we find ourselves in now. You know, Halloween being kept the latter part of October and basically into November. But he ordained a feast in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that is in Judah. And so he offered up on the altar. So he did in Bethel sacrifice unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priest of the high places which he had made. So he offered up on the altar which he had made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, about a month later, essentially, after the feast in the 7th month, even the months we had devised of his own heart, man-made religion, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel, and he offered upon the altar and burnt incense. So certainly we see a great similarity that takes place between Halloween and what happened here. You see, oftentimes Satan the devil, he certainly does leave clues as to how he works. But this certainly is an example of a counterfeit Feast of Tabernacles, and it's interesting because it comes apparently at the same time of the fall harvest, and it was made to the Roman goddess Pomona. So we're going to see, you go back into history, you always find Satan the devil again and again counterfeiting God's truth, trying to make something that has a close similitude to God's truth. But we also see that Halloween has another origin. It was also an ancient Druid festival. Now, first of all, let's stop to consider who were the Druids. They were pagan priests who lived in Gaul and Great Britain. They're greatly respected for their knowledge. They were tree worshipers. And you find as you go back into history that tree worship is very much prevalent in mankind's history. I would highly recommend to you Hislop's book, The Two Babylons. There's another one that a man by the name of Ralph Woodrow wrote, Babylon, the Mystery Religion. Oh, it's kind of interesting because Ralph Woodrow actually he apostatized and went back to observing Christmas after he had condemned it earlier on. So stranger things have happened. But Hislop's he borrowed, certainly Ralph Woodrow borrowed and condensed a great deal of Alexander Hislop's book, and I'm sure Alexander Hislop did not apostatize. I mean, he was a very, very erudite, intelligent, studious man, obviously, if you read his book. Well, but these gods, it's important to realize that they would worship were the same as the Greek gods and the Romans, but they had different names, and the Druids did. They worshiped the same gods, but different names, and you'll see that as you study pagan mythology. Notice over here in Ezekiel 6 and verse 13. Ezekiel 6 and verse 13. Notice here what it says. Then you shall know that I am the Lord, when their slain man shall be among their idols round about their altars upon every high hill, and all the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every thick oak, the place where they did offer sweet savor to all their idols. And so will I stretch out my hand upon them and make the land desolate, yes, more desolate in the history, the wilderness towards Diblath and all their habitations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. You'll see that particular expression by Ezekiel all throughout Ezekiel, this main theme, that they shall know that I am the Lord. But certainly we know that the Druids were tree worshipers, and you find, if you go back into history, you will find that tree worship finds its origin in the worship of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, that trinity that existed, a false worship that existed at the very beginning of mankind's history. We know that supposedly that Nimrod was killed, and that he sprung from a stump of a dead tree, became Tammuz, Semiramis's son, husband, son lover. Supposedly was Nimrod reincarnated. So you find that that's not a subject, but you go back into history, you find tree worship very much in play. But their instructions were secret. They were carried on in secrecy, and certainly you find that all throughout false worship. The secrecy that took place, and usually they met out in the forest and out where they were by themselves, and their secret rites. There's not too much known about them because some of it was kept secret. But the principal point of their doctrine, according to Caesar, it's important fact to remember, is that the soul does not die, and that after death it passes from one body to another. You know, the same false philosophy that most Far Eastern religions are based upon, the transmigration of souls that Paul had to deal with in the New Testament. And the old immortality of the soul, that's what they believe. They believe that in our life, that after we die, we would inhabit the body of another animal, depending on what type of life we had lived. We know that this festival was very popular. Now, the Druids had a harvest festival called Samhain. Samhain. What did it mean? It meant summer's end. Festival, when did it fall? Fell upon November 1st. Isn't that striking? It was an occasion for feasting on the food grown during the summer. And the modern custom of Halloween decorations of corn stalks and pumpkins and leaves and apples, all of that finds its origin in this ancient Druid celebration, as well as the celebration we just mentioned to Pomona. But they also had what they called the Lord of the Dead, Samhain or Samhain, the Lord of the Dead, and his festival fell upon November the 1st. So we're starting to get a better picture of how and where Halloween did find its origins. Now I want to read to you again some notes I've written in my Bible about this celebration. This comes from the Handbook of Christian Customs by Weiser as well. Halloween customs are traced back to the ancient Druids. Halloween fires are kindled in many places even now, especially in Wales and Scotland. Another more important tradition is the Druidic belief that during the night of November 1st, demons, witches, and evil spirits roam the earth in wild and furious gambols of joy to greet the arrival of their seasons. The long and early dark of the winter months. They had their fun with the poor mortals at night, frightening them, harming them, and playing all kinds of mean tricks. That's where we get our custom of trick or treat. The only way it seemed for humans to escape the persecution of demons was to offer them things they liked, especially dainty foods and sweets, or in order to escape the fury of these horrible creatures, a human could disguise himself as one of them and join in their roaming. This is what people did in ancient times. It's in the very form of the custom that has come to us, practically unaltered as our familiar Halloween celebration. Isn't that incredible? I well remember when I was a little boy, that was a big, boy, if you told me then I couldn't go out for Halloween, that would have been a major disappointment. I made it a real business. I had a big grocery sack, and I wanted that baby fill by the end of the evening. I would start out early, and even when it was 9 o'clock, I was wondering if I should still keep going. And we dressed up, just like we're talking about here, and like some kind of costume. Just in ancient times, they supposedly were going out with the demons and the evil spirits along with them, so they wouldn't be recognized, and trick-or-treating with them. Isn't that something? This is from Halloween Through the Centuries. The American celebration rests upon Scottish and Irish false customs, which can be traced in direct line from pre-Christian time. I know some people, a lot of people take great pride in their Scottish and Irish heritage. I really don't. I don't really, I don't. Because I think the Irish were some of the greatest pagans of all time. I mean, they really were. And so that's nothing to be proud of. I have a lot of Irish in me, but it's nothing to, it leaves me cold, a lot of the traditions. The earliest Halloween celebrations were held by the Druids in honor of Samhain or Samhain, Lord of the Dead, whose festival fell on November the 1st. This comes from the Halloween Through the Centuries as well. Halloween long antedates Christianity. The two chief characteristics of Halloween were the lighting of bonfires and the belief that this is the one night in which the ghosts and the witches were likely to wander about. History shows that the main celebration of Halloween were purely druidical, and is further proof that October 31st is still known as the vigil or of Samhain or Samhain. Jack-o'-lanterns were used to frighten away the evil spirits. You wonder where that comes from. This time of year, you see all those pumpkins out there, and people are going to haul them out and make jack-o'-lanterns. It comes from the celebration of the God of the Dead. Here's another one from says they indulged in every Christian Halloween through the 20 centuries. They indulged in every conceivable antic and ceremonial ritual in the fervent hope that they could somehow coax this mysterious Lord of the Dead to let their loved ones at least inhabit the bodies of perhaps a higher form of animal. That's based upon the false doctrine of the immortality of the soul. The Druids thought that eventually, after some indeterminate number of years or months, the bodies of animals on the new year, their sins were expiated and they could go to be released to Druid heaven. Isn't that something? To Druid heaven. So, wandering around on Halloween, pretending to be some kind of monster, or it all goes back to trick-or-treating, all goes back to the Druids. Notice also, it's important to realize the date of this it was done was November the 1st. And we know, of course, October the 30th, when the Halloween is celebrated, is on the eve of this festival. We realize that actually Samhain is actually the Lord of the Dead that actually is Satan the devil. You know, Hebrews 2 and verse 14. This is who is being worshipped. You know, Satan has this desire, and you know, I have given a sermon on this, Satan's greatest desire. Remember this circumstance when Satan offered Christ all the kings of the world if Christ would fall down and worship him? That's his great desire, the desire to be worshipped. And so you find within all these pagan festivals this component of Satan's concealed lawlessness and wanting to be worshipped. And we do need to take these things seriously. A lot of people take them lightly, but what difference does it make? Well, it makes a great difference to God. And Hebrews 2 and verse 14. Hebrews 2 and verse 14. Forasmuch then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he also likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is the devil. I mean, Satan the devil. You know, the wages of sin is death. Satan's your employer, and the mighty poor wages, the wages is death. He's a liar also. It tells us in John 8 and verse 44. I ran into an individual recently that it never ceases to amaze me. I mean, man who has 18, 19 different names he deceives people with. Well, Satan the devil, John 8 and verse 44. It tells us, you're your father the devil, and the lust of your father he will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. So why should it be such a great surprise that our entire world has been deceived by Satan the devil? He's a liar. He's continually trying to bring lies into God's church, into the Christianity of this world. It's amazing then, if we stop to consider that here mainstream Christianity accepts, or at least condones and allows this festival to be observed, which is in the honor of Samhain, the god of the dead. Satan the devil, desire essentially of Satan who wants to be worshipped. Now we realize thirdly that this celebration has its origins in the Catholic Church. Let's go back and read some information here from the Catholic Encyclopedia. We read here, All Saints' Day is a feast of the highest rank, celebrated on the 1st of November, having a vigil celebrated the evening before, Halloween meaning hallowed or sacred evening, in an octave 8-day celebration observance beginning with this festival day. It is instituted to honor all saints, known and unknown, according to Urban IV, to supply any deficiencies in the faithful celebration of saints during the day. In other words, All Saints' Day. In case you missed worshiping some saint or honoring some saint, then this will make up for that deficiency. Now, I know people say, we don't worship the saints, we don't worship these idols. Well, I look at the newspaper all the time. I see people wanting to, encouraging you to pray to a certain deceased saint that they would intervene for you and bless you. Is that not worship? I mean, just excuses. In the early years, Christians were accustomed to solemnize the anniversary of martyr's death for Christ in the place of the martyrdom. In the 4th century, dioceses began to interchange feasts to transfer relics to divide them into a common feast. Frequently, groups of martyrs who suffered on the same day, which naturally led to a common celebration. In other words, they were honoring these saints, and so they needed a day, because many of them died on the same day, to honor them all at the same time. In the persecution of Diocletian, the number of martyrs became so great that a separate day could not be assigned for each. But the church, feeling that every martyr should be venerated, appointed a common day for all. At first, only John the Baptist and many were honored by special days. Other saints were added gradually. In the West, Boniface IV, 609 to 610, consecrated the Pantheon in Rome to the Blessed Virgin Mary and all the martyrs' ordinary anniversary. Gregory II, 731 to 741, consecrated a chapel and basilica of St. Peter to all saints and fixed the anniversary to 1st of November. This comes from the Catholic Encyclopedia, 1907 edition. So this is well substantiated. Solid evidence that this was a pagan day combined, amalgamated, incorporated with a church, a religious day. I want to read to you from Britannica Junior Encyclopedia, 1971. Halloween is a day on which children play pranks. Originally, it fell on October 31st, the eve of All Saints' Day. As is often the case, Halloween is an example of the combining of a pagan festival and Christian worship. Both the Romans and ancient Britons celebrated an autumn festival on this day. Many of the customs of Halloween are based on the belief and the fears of past times. Some of them date back to the ancient Druids, who encouraged superstition because it gave them power. One of the beliefs of pagan Ireland was that on this night, the dead could return to the earth as witches, goblins, and ghosts, black ghosts, or other weird forms. The date marked the end of summer, or the time when the sun retreated before the powers of darkness. All of the dark powers, underworld characters, then had their carnival of triumph when they were supposed to engage in all sorts of malicious mischief. Against them, any kind of light was considered a protection. Jack-o'-lanterns. What are the little things we put out there with candles on, and the paper sacks? Illuminati's, right? I think I see those around Halloween, don't you? I thought I did. Maybe it's my imagination. I'm thinking of Christmas, maybe. Just not in her head. You're probably thinking of Christmas. But anyway, light was considered protection against these malicious spirits. Hence arose the custom of building great bonfires and carrying blazing torches around fields. Candles replaced fires. Witch elm with hazel and holly were thought to furnish protection. An old Scottish superstition, which still carried out today with Halloween decorations, it was witches, those who sold their soul to the devil, left their beds on Halloween night on a stick. made by magic to look like themselves, and they would fly up the chimney and off through the skies on a broomstick attended by black cats. That's something. As I said, that comes from Encyclopedia Britannica Junior, 1971. This comes from the World Book 1957. Halloween is a festival celebrated October 31st. It means hallowed or sacred evening because it comes before All Saints' Day. The church has celebrated All Saints' Day in the 1600s, but not on November 1st. The early people of Europe also had a festival which was celebrated somewhat like the Druid holiday. In the 700s, the church named November 1st as All Saints' Festival, or the day for honoring all saints. The old pagan customs and the Christian festivals were combined into a holiday which people celebrate as the Halloween festivities. The Druids, an order of priests in Gaul and Britain, had an autumn's festival. They called it Celebration Samhain, Samhain, or Summer's End. It was a custom for feasting on all kinds of foods going during the summer. The modern custom of decorating for Halloween parties with pumpkins, leaves, and cornstalks comes from the Druids. The Druids also believed on Halloween ghost spirits, fairies, witches, and elves came out to harm people. They built bonfires to such creatures, to drive such creatures away. You know, open admissions that Halloween is an example of the combining of Christianity, mainstream Christianity, with Christian worship. Another interesting fact is, recall the Druids would appeal to the Lord of the Dead to allow one of their loved ones to enter a higher form of animal. And Catholic Church also established an All Souls Day. Important to realize. All Souls Day. This day commemorates all the souls in purgatory on November the 2nd. It is a day for the remembrance of the dead and for offering of masses. On this day, as on Christmas, priests are allowed to say 3 masses for the souls of the dead departed that may be free from purgatory. You know, it's amazing the more we study these things, their roots, where they come from. So we clearly then, we understand that Halloween is basically built around 3 basic components. The harvest festival of the ancient Romans, dedicated to the goddess Pomona. As I've said, really it looks like a type of counterfeit Feast of Tabernacles occurring at the end of their harvest season. It was an ancient Druid festival dedicated to the Lord of the Dead. And the Catholic Church, in honor of all the saints of the church and martyrs, established this Halloween, hallowed evening. It's basically what that word means, hallowed evening. It's another important point to not lose sight of. Hallowed evening of all the saints of the church and the martyrs, all combined into a Babylonian type of mystery religion. We find it again. Revelation 18 and verse 3. Revelation 18 and verse 3. I should begin. Let's start back in verse 2. And he cried madly with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, all these demonic teachings and demons that have entered this false religious system, and the hole of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And we have this admonition here, which applies to you and I. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive none of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Isn't that something that we have seen brethren that have gone right back in to that system, and God is saying her sins have reached unto heaven, and they want to go right back into it. It is beyond belief. And yet, what's amazing is Christians will think, well, God doesn't care. He doesn't care what I do. We know God is a jealous God, and He does burn with jealousy towards us as His people. And He loves us, and whenever we turn away from Him to a false idol, He does become very jealous. And I'll just say as an aside that if you have in your home any type of idol, I've seen people want to make compromises. Perhaps they have some little keepsake or some little cross or some little angel someone has given to them. And they want to make compromises and say, well, you know, it has sentimental value. Do not allow those type of things in your house. They do make you susceptible to demonic problems. And I will say that I can tell you much scripture and empirical, practical experience that individuals have experienced in the church with that. I know Gardner Ted Armstrong, in a booklet he wrote, talked about how important it is not to have idolatry and crosses, any type of pagan idolatry in your home. And I've had people try to resist that. I've had people argue with me and say, "Oh, it's so sweet, has in this beautiful." And I've had people, you know, the world is filled full of idolatry, and you know, have these little, especially even within the southwestern Indian jewelry we have out here. There's a lot of paganism and idolatry. So we all need to be careful about these things, because it does matter. It tells us in Zechariah 8 in verse 1. It says, "Again the word of the Lord of the host came to me, saying, Thus saith the Lord God of the host, I was jealous for Zion with great jealousy, and I was jealous for her with great fury." And God has great love for us as His people. Someone asked one time, well, I remember when I was still attending the Baptist church, we were having a Sunday school class. Someone was trying to put the Sunday school teacher on the spot. He says, well, do you think jealousy is a weakness? And I think the Sunday school teacher said he thought it was. He says, well, then why does it say God is a jealous God? Jealousy certainly not should be uncontrolled. I've known men so jealous of their wives that they were tyrants, but jealousy can be very much a part of love. Next week, I think when I first gave this sermon originally, I went through Ezekiel 8. I think this would be a good time to stop, because we're going to see here in Ezekiel 8 just how jealous our God is, and what pagan worship really means, and how wrong it is in God's sight. And we'll pick it up in the next sermon, second half of this particular sermon. The title of my sermon actually is "Halloween Does It Matter?" Well, it really does matter. And next sermon we will see in an even greater way just how serious idolatry is to God, and how it does certainly stir up His anger. So we'll pick it up next Sabbath.